After Michael kicked me out of the house, I got a job as a cook in a small downtown diner. Every day, when I left work, I would see the same lady sitting on the corner, asking for spare change. She was older than me, with a face weathered by the sun and trembling hands. Something in her eyes reminded me of my own mother. I started to stop in front of her. I would give her some coins, sometimes a roll left over from the kitchen. We never talked much. Just a nod, a tired smile, and I would continue on my way to the boarding house, where I now lived alone. I was 69 years old when my son told me there was no longer room for me in that house. He didn't raise his voice. There was no scene. He just looked at me from across the table and said it was time for me to find my own space, that he had his life, his plans, and that I needed to understand. Understand what? I didn't know until much later. I remember packing my things in an old duffel bag, clothes, some documents, a photo of Michael when he was little. Nothing else. I didn't have much. I had lived my entire life caring for that house, for that son, for that family that was now shutting the door on me with a cold courtesy that hurt more than any insult. I didn't cry in front of him. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. I walked out with my head held high, though inside I felt like something was shattering. It was like walking barefoot on glass, but without letting anyone notice the pain. The boarding house where I found a room was small and dark. The walls had damp stains, and the mattress creaked every time I moved. But it was what I could afford with what I had left of my social security. Michael hadn't given me a thing. He didn't even offer to help me with the first month's rent. I spent the first few nights awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when everything had gone wrong. I had been a good mother. I had given him everything. I had worked until my body couldn't take any more. I had given up my dreams, my desires, so that he could have what I never did. And now I was here, alone, old, invisible. But I couldn't stay put. I couldn't afford the luxury of sinking into sadness. I needed money. I needed to eat. So I went out to look for work. I knocked on many doors. In some, they wouldn't even let me finish speaking. "We don't hire people your age anymore," they would say with an uncomfortable smile. In others, they would look me up and down and shake their heads before I could say my name. Until I arrived at Mr. George's diner. It was a modest place, with wooden tables and checkered tablecloths. It smelled of fried onions and fresh coffee. Mr. George was a man in his 50s, with grey hair and big, calloused hands. He looked at me in silence when I told him I was looking for work. "Can you cook?" he asked. "I've been cooking my whole life," I replied. He nodded. "Start tomorrow, 6 in the morning. Don't be late." There was no contract, no paperwork, just a handshake and the promise of a weekly wage. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to pay for the boarding house and buy some groceries. That night, I slept a little better. I had a purpose. I had something to do. The work at the diner was hard. I spent hours on my feet, peeling potatoes, chopping vegetables, stirring huge pots. My hands got covered in small burns. My feet swelled up at the end of the day. But I didn't complain. I couldn't afford that luxury. The other employees were young. They looked at me with curiosity at first, then with indifference. I didn't talk much. I did my job and then I left. I wasn't looking for friends. I wasn't looking for pity. It was one of those afternoons, as I was leaving the diner, that I saw her for the first time. She was sitting on the corner, near the bus stop. She had white, messy hair, and her clothes were dirty and torn. In front of her was a rusty can with a few coins. I walked right past the first time. Not because I didn't want to help, but because I barely had anything myself. But something made me turn back. Maybe it was her gaze. Maybe it was the memory of my own mother, who had also grown old in silence, always waiting for someone to see her. The next day, I stopped in front of her. I took some coins out of my pocket and dropped them into the can. She looked up and met my eyes, which were tired. She didn't say anything. She just nodded slightly. That became a routine. Every day, after leaving work, I would stop in front of her. Sometimes I would give her money. Other times, a piece of cornbread I had saved from the diner. We never spoke, just that silent exchange of humanity. Weeks passed, then months. My life had been reduced to that: work, walk, sleep. I hadn't heard from Michael. I wasn't looking for him. I didn't want to know about him. But there was something that made me uneasy. Lately, when I walked past the boarding house, I felt like someone was watching me. Once I saw a shadow move behind a window. Another time, as I went up the stairs, I heard footsteps quickly moving away. I dismissed it. I thought it was my imagination. That loneliness was playing tricks on me. Until one afternoon, as I bent down to give the lady on the corner some coins, she grabbed my hand tightly. Her fingers were cold and bony, but her grip was firm. She looked me straight in the eyes and said in a raspy voice, "You've been good to me all these months. Let me return the favor. Don't go back to your boarding house today. Find a simple motel. Stay there tonight. Tomorrow morning I'll tell you something that will change your life." I was paralyzed. Her gaze was serious, urgent. There was no madness in her eyes, only certainty. "Why?" I managed to ask. She shook her head. "Trust me, please." I slowly released her hand and walked away, confused. What did she mean? Why shouldn't I go back to my boarding house? What did she know that I didn't? I walked aimlessly for a while, my heart racing. Part of me wanted to ignore her words. I thought maybe she was senile, that she had confused things. But another part of me, the part that had felt those strange looks, those footsteps in the dark, told me to listen. In the end, I decided to take her advice. I found a cheap motel near downtown. I paid with the little money I had saved and went up to a small room with a hard bed and a window overlooking an alley. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my hands. They were wrinkled, stained, tired. My whole life I had worked with these hands. I had cooked, cleaned, cared for. And now I was here, in an unfamiliar motel, following the advice of a woman who lived on the street. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for dawn to come so I could find out what that woman had to tell me. Dawn arrived slowly, filtering through the dirty motel window. I hadn't slept. Every noise in the hallway startled me. Every car that passed on the street made me think of the absurdity of my situation. I was in a cheap motel, following the advice of a stranger, while my room in the boarding house remained empty. I got up with an aching body. I washed my face with cold water and left without breakfast. I wasn't hungry. I just had questions. The lady was still on her corner, just like always, as if she hadn't moved all night. But when she saw me approaching, her eyes lit up with something like relief. "You did well not to go back," she said before I could speak. I knelt down in front of her, not caring that people were walking past us, looking with curiosity. "What's going on? What do you know?" She looked around, as if making sure no one was listening to us. Then she leaned in toward me and spoke in a low voice. "I saw a man circling your boarding house 2 days ago. Then yesterday afternoon, he was looking up at your window, waiting for something." My heart skipped a beat. "What man?" "Tall, dark hair. He was well dressed, not like the people around here. He had a black bag in his hand. She paused. He looked like you, in the eyes, in the shape of the mouth. I couldn't breathe. Michael, are you sure? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She nodded. I live here, on this corner. No one sees me, but I see everything. That man wasn't coming to visit you. He was coming to do something, and it wasn't anything good. My hands were shaking. I wanted to say she was wrong, that Michael would never do anything like that. But the words wouldn't come out. Because deep down, something in me already knew. I had felt his coldness. I had seen his indifference. And now this. Thank you, I managed to say. Thank you for warning me. She touched my arm gently. You fed me when no one else would. It was the least I could do. I walked away from her, stunned. My legs could barely hold me up. I wandered aimlessly for a while, trying to process what I had just heard. Michael had been at the boarding house, looking for me, waiting for me. Why? I passed the diner, but I didn't go in. I couldn't work in this state. Mr. George would see my face and know something was wrong. I needed to think. I needed to understand. I went to a nearby park and sat down on a bench. There were pigeons pecking at the ground and children playing in the distance. Everything seemed so normal, so disconnected from what I was feeling. I thought of Michael, of the boy he had been. I remembered when he was 5 years old and came down with a high fever. I spent 3 nights awake taking care of him, putting cold compresses on his forehead, praying for him to get better. I remembered his high school graduation, the day he told me he was going to get married. When had that boy turned into this? I took my old phone out of my pocket. I had some unread messages. One was from the owner of the boarding house. I opened it with trembling hands. Mary, I need to talk to you urgently. Call me. I dialed her number, my heart pounding. She answered on the second ring. Mary, thank goodness. Where are you? Her voice sounded frantic. In a park. What's wrong? There was a silence, then a sigh. There was a problem at the boarding house last night. In your room. My blood ran cold. What kind of problem? There was a gas leak, specifically in your room. If you had been there. She left the sentence unfinished. The world stopped. A gas leak. In my room. The very night the lady had told me not to go back. How did it happen? I asked in a voice I barely recognized as my own. I don't know. The technician came this morning. He said the water heater valve was open. But I don't understand. You were always so careful with those things. I didn't open that valve, I said. I haven't used the water heater in weeks. Another silence. Then someone else did. I hung up. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Someone had entered my room, had opened the gas valve, had tried to kill me, and that someone was Michael. I went back to the corner where the lady was. She looked at me with sadness, as if she already knew what I had just discovered. I'm sorry, she said simply. I sat down on the ground next to her, not caring about the dirt. My son tried to kill me. The words sounded unreal even as I said them, but they were true as the sun burning our skin at that moment. I've seen them before, she said softly. Sons who get tired of waiting, who want what their parents have. It's more common than you think. But I don't have anything, I said bitterly. Just a small property my husband left me. A piece of land worth only a few $1,000s. For that? For so little? She looked at me with wise eyes. For some people, any amount is enough, especially if they have debts, if they have bad habits, If they have needs, they can't control. I remembered the calls then, the ones Michael received that made him nervous, the whispered conversations, the times I asked him to borrow something and he refused, saying money was tight. I always thought it was normal, that everyone goes through bad patches. But now everything made sense. Michael needed money, and I was the only thing standing between him and that piece of land my husband had left me. "What do I do now?" I asked, not to her specifically, to the air, to the sky, to whoever wanted to answer. "You go to the police," she said firmly, "and you tell them everything, because if you don't, he'll try again. And next time you might not have a crazy old lady to warn you." She was right. I knew it. But going to the police meant admitting that my son wanted to see me dead. It meant putting into words what I could barely accept in my mind. I spent the rest of the day walking around the city. I didn't go to work. I didn't call Mr. George to explain. I just walked, trying to find the courage to do what I had to do. As evening fell, I returned to the cheap motel. I paid for another night with the little money I had left. I locked myself in the room and finally cried. I cried for the son I had lost, for the life I had built that was now crumbling, for myself and the naivety of believing that a mother's love was enough to protect me from everything. When my tears ran out, I washed my face and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were swollen. My skin was pale. I looked older than I was. But there was something new in my gaze. Something hard. Something that wasn't there before. Determination. I wasn't going to let Michael win. I wasn't going to die in silence so he could cash in on a piece of land he didn't even need. If he wanted to kill me, he would have to face me first. The next morning, I looked for the nearest police station. It was an old building with peeling paint. I walked in with a firm step, although I was trembling inside. A young officer greeted me at the counter. "How can I help you, ma'am?" I took a deep breath. "I'm here to report an attempted murder." He looked up, surprised. "Can you give me more details?" "My son tried to kill me," I said, and for the first time since I knew it, my voice didn't tremble as I said it. They sat me down in a small room. Another officer came in, older, with an immaculate uniform and a serious look. He introduced himself as Sergeant Martinez. "Tell me everything from the beginning," he said, opening a notebook. And I told him. I told him about being kicked out of my house, about the job at the diner, about the lady on the corner and her warning, about the gas leak, about Michael circling the boarding house. The sergeant took notes without interrupting me. When I finished, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "Do you have proof of any of this?" he asked. "The boarding house owner can confirm the gas leak, and the lady who warned me saw Michael. Does this lady have a name, an address?" I realized I didn't even know what her name was. "She lives on the street, on the corner of Central Avenue and 5th Street. The sergeant closed his notebook. "Mrs. Olson, I'm going to be honest with you. Without concrete evidence, this is difficult to investigate. A gas leak can be an accident, and the testimony of someone with no fixed address doesn't carry much legal weight." I felt myself sinking. "So you're not going to do anything?" "I didn't say that. I'm going to open an investigation. I'm going to talk to the boarding house owner. I'm going to check if there are cameras in the area. But I need you to be prepared for this to take time." I nodded, although inside I felt like I was drowning. Time was exactly what I didn't have, because Michael was still out there, and now he would know that I was onto him. I left the police station with heavy legs. The sun was burning the sidewalk, and people hurried past me, each wrapped up in their own worries. No one looked at me. No one knew that I had just reported my own son for trying to kill me. I couldn't go back to the boarding house. That was clear. But I also couldn't keep paying for motels. The money I had saved was running out fast. I needed to think. I needed a plan. I walked to the diner. Mr. George was in the kitchen, as always, with his stained apron and his brow furrowed as he checked a pot. When he saw me come in, his expression softened just a little. "Mary, you didn't come in yesterday, or the day before." "I'm sorry," I said. I didn't know what else to say. He wiped his hands on his apron and looked me up and down. "Are you okay?" The simple question almost broke me. No one had asked me that in so long that I had forgotten how it felt for someone to care. I nodded, even though we both knew it was a lie. "I need to work," I said. "Please, I need the money." Mr. George sighed. "All right, but if something happens to you, if you need help, you tell me." "Understood." I nodded again and put on my apron. The work helped me to stop thinking. I peeled potatoes until my hands ached. I chopped onions until the falling tears could be mistaken for those caused by the sting. I washed dishes until the hot water turned my skin red. At the end of the day, Mr. George paid me for the entire week, even though I had missed 2 days. I didn't say anything. I just took the money and put it carefully in my pocket. When I left, I looked for the lady on her corner. I needed to talk to someone. I needed someone to understand what I was going through. But she wasn't there that day. Her spot was empty. Only the rusted can was overturned on the ground. A sudden fear washed over me. What if something had happened to her? What if Michael had discovered that she had warned me? I walked through the nearby streets looking for her, asking other homeless people if they had seen her. No one knew anything. No one remembered seeing her. I went back to the motel with a tight chest. I went up to my room and sat on the bed, looking at the phone. I had 3 missed calls, all 3 from a number I knew very well. Michael hadn't left any voice messages, just the calls. Insistent, as if he knew I was avoiding him. I went to bed without dinner. The hunger was a dull ache in my stomach, but I didn't have the strength to go out and look for food. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but every noise startled me. Every step in the hallway made me hold my breath. Sometime in the middle of the night, I finally fell into a restless sleep. I dreamed of Michael as a child. He had a fever and was calling me from his bed. I ran toward him, but the room grew longer and longer. I never managed to reach him, and his voice became more and more desperate until it turned into a scream. I woke up sweating. The clock showed 5 o'clock in the morning. It was still dark outside. I got up and washed my face. It was pointless to try to sleep anymore. I went down to the reception area. The night manager was dozing behind the counter. He didn't see me leave. The streets were empty. Only a few early workers were walking toward their jobs. I arrived at the corner where the lady always was, hoping to find her there, but it was still empty. I sat down on the ground, in the same spot where she usually sat, and waited. I didn't know what else to do. The sky began to lighten slowly, painting itself in shades of grey and orange. The city was waking up around me. It was then that I saw her. She was walking slowly along the sidewalk, dragging her feet, with a plastic bag in her hand. When she saw me sitting in her spot, she stopped, surprised. "What are you doing here so early?" she asked. I stood up quickly. "I thought something had happened to you. You weren't here yesterday." She smiled tiredly. "There's a shelter that opens on Thursdays. They serve hot food. I went there." She lifted the bag. "They gave me clean clothes." I felt enormous relief. "I went to the police. I told them everything." Her expression became serious. "And what did they say?" "That they're going to investigate. but that they need evidence, that without evidence they can't do much. She nodded slowly. That's how it always works. Poor people need evidence. Rich people just need words. We remained in silence. I didn't know if Michael was rich, but he definitely had more than I did. He had connections. He had a house. He had a life that I had helped build, and from which I was now completely excluded. "What are you going to do?" she asked me. "I don't know," I admitted. "I can't go back to the boarding house. I can't keep paying for motels, and I have nowhere to go." She looked at me with those eyes that had seen too much. "There's a women's shelter on 7th Street. It's not pretty, but it's safe. You can stay there while you figure things out." The idea of going to a shelter made my stomach churn. I had worked my whole life. I had had a house, a family, a normal life. And now I was considering going to a shelter as if I were just another homeless person. But that's exactly what I was now, wasn't it? A homeless woman. A woman whose own son wanted to see her dead. "Thank you," I said. "I'll think about it." I went straight to the diner from there. Mr. George was already preparing the day's ingredients. He saw me arrive and didn't say anything, just pointed toward the aprons. I worked all morning in silence, grateful for the distraction. During my midday break, I went out for some air. I sat in the alley behind the diner, where the empty vegetable crates were piled up. I took out my phone and stared at Michael's missed calls. Part of me wanted to answer him. I wanted to confront him. Ask him why. Ask him how it had come to this. But another part of me knew that would only put him on alert. If he suspected that I knew something, he might act faster. He might be more careful. The phone rang in my hand. It was him again. This time, before I could think too much, I answered. "Mum." His voice sounded relieved. "You finally answered. I've been worried." The lie was so brazen it almost made me laugh. "Worried? Yeah, I've been calling you. Where are you? Why aren't you at the boarding house?" So he already knew. He had probably gone looking for me, and the owner had told him I hadn't slept there. "I'm with a friend," I lied. "I needed a change of scenery." There was a pause. "What friend? I thought you didn't know anyone here." "I met people at work," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Why all the interest, Michael? I thought you didn't want anything to do with me anymore." "That's not true, Mum. I just wanted you to have your space. But you're still my mother. I worry about you." The words were right, but the tone was empty. It was like listening to an actor reciting a poorly written script. "I have to hang up," I said. "I'm working." "Wait. I need to talk to you about something. About the papers for Dad's land. There are some documents I need you to sign. It's to renew the property taxes. Can you come home this weekend?" There it was. The real reason for his call. The papers. The land. The inheritance that was worth more than my life. "I can't this weekend," I said. "I'm busy." "It's important, Mum. If we don't renew the taxes, we could lose the property." "Then lose it," I said before hanging up. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. I had been more direct than I intended. Now he would know that something was wrong. I went back inside. Mr. George looked at me worriedly but didn't ask anything. I finished my shift on autopilot, my mind elsewhere. When I left, I looked for the address the lady had given me. The shelter was in a grey 2-story building. There was a line of women waiting outside, some with children, others alone, like me. I stood at the end of the line. A social worker with a clipboard was writing down names. When my turn came, she looked at me with professional tiredness. Name and age. Mary Olson, 69 years old. She wrote without looking at me. Domestic violence situation. I hesitated. Did this count as domestic violence? My son. He kicked me out of the house. She looked up for the first time. Something on my face must have told her there was more to the story. You can go in. There's a bed available tonight. They gave me a clean sheet and showed me a large room with bunk beds. There were other women there, some young, others my age, all with the same lost look, all trying to understand how they had ended up there. I put my few belongings under the bed I was assigned and sat down on the thin mattress. This was my life now. A shelter, a borrowed bed, nowhere to call home. But at least I was alive. And as long as I was alive, I could fight. I spent 5 nights at the shelter, 5 nights listening to the crying of babies, the whispered conversations of women who couldn't sleep, the creaking of the bunk beds every time someone moved. The place smelled of cheap detergent and accumulated despair. During the day, I worked at the diner. Mr. George had noticed my tiredness, but he didn't ask. I was grateful for his silence. I didn't have the strength to explain how a 69-year-old woman had ended up sleeping in a homeless shelter. On the 6th day, when I arrived at work, Mr. George was waiting for me at the back door. He had a furrowed brow and his arms crossed. "I need to talk to you," he said. My heart sank. Was he going to fire me? I couldn't lose this job. It was the only stable thing I had. "Come with me," he said, and led me to his small office in the back of the diner. It was a narrow room with an old desk and walls covered in receipts tacked up with thumbtacks. He sat down and pointed to the other chair. "Sit." I obeyed, my hands clasped in my lap. "A woman came by yesterday asking about you," he said. "Young, well-dressed. She said she was your daughter-in-law." My blood froze. What did she want? "She wanted to know where you live. She said your son was worried because you weren't answering the phone, that they wanted to make sure you were okay." "What did you tell her?" "That I didn't know, that you just come to work and leave. Nothing else." He looked me straight in the eyes. "Mary, you're in trouble." The words got stuck in my throat. I wanted to say no, that everything was fine, but my face gave me away. Mr. George sighed. "I don't know what's going on, and I'm not going to force you to tell me, but that woman didn't look worried. She looked like she was hunting." He was right. Michael was looking for me, and now he was using his wife to track me down. "Thank you for not telling her anything," I managed to say. "Be careful," Mr. George said. "And if you need anything, even if it's just someone to know where you are in case something happens, you tell me." I nodded and left the office, my legs trembling. I worked the rest of the day, constantly looking toward the door, expecting to see Michael's wife appear at any moment. That afternoon, when I left the diner, I went straight to the corner where the lady always was. I needed to talk to someone. I needed to vent before I exploded. She was there, sitting in her usual spot, with the can in front of her. When she saw me arrive with a distressed face, she made a space next to her. "Tell me," she said simply. I told her about Michael's call, about his wife's visit to the diner, about how I felt trapped, not knowing what to do. She listened in silence, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she looked thoughtful. "Do you know what surprises me the most about all this?" she finally said. "That he thinks you're stupid. He thinks you don't notice. That you can be easily manipulated." She was right. Michael had always treated me that way, as if I were naive, as if I didn't understand how the world worked. "Use that to your advantage," she continued. "Let him think he's in control. Meanwhile, you prepare your defense." "What defense? I have nothing." not even proof of what he did. She looked at me with that wisdom that only comes from living on the street. The evidence is there. You just have to know where to look. The owner of your boarding house can testify about the gas. The technician who checked the installation has a report. And I saw your son that night. The officer said your testimony doesn't count for much because you don't have a fixed address, I said with bitterness. Then we have to give me one, she said with a sad smile. Or get something else that makes me credible. I didn't understand what she meant until 2 days later. It was Friday morning. I arrived at the diner early, as always. But when I walked in the back door, I found Mr. George talking to a man in uniform. He wasn't a regular cop. It was Sergeant Martinez. My first instinct was to run out, but Mr. George saw me and motioned for me to come closer. Mrs. Olson, the sergeant said, I need to speak with you. Panic tightened my chest. Did something happen? Yes and no. Can we talk privately? Mr. George lent us his office. The sergeant closed the door and pulled out a manila folder. I've been investigating your case, he said, and I found some interesting things. He opened the folder and showed me some papers. They were bank statements. It took me a moment to realize they were Michael's. How did you get this? I asked. I have my methods, he said vaguely. Look here. Your son has considerable debts, unpaid loans, credit cards maxed out, and 3 months ago he took out a loan using the land your husband left you as collateral. I was breathless. He can do that. The land is in my name. He didn't forge your signature, and that's exactly what I think happened. He showed me another paper. This is the deed he presented to the bank. This is your signature. I looked at the document. The signature looked like mine, but it wasn't exact. The strokes were different, firmer, more confident. No, I said. That is not my signature. The sergeant nodded, satisfied. That, he said. This changes everything. We're no longer just talking about attempted murder. We're talking about fraud, document forgery, and possibly more. What does that mean? It means we have a solid reason to arrest him. The attempted murder is difficult to prove without credible witnesses, but the bank fraud is clearer. Banks don't take these things lightly. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. You're going to arrest him? I need you to come to the police station and make a formal statement about the forgery. I also need you to bring any documents you have about the land. Original deeds, records, anything that proves you are the sole owner. They're at the boarding house, I said. In a shoebox under my bed. You can go get them. The idea of returning to the boarding house terrified me. But I needed those papers. They were the only proof that the land was mine. I'll go with you, the sergeant said, as if reading my mind. You won't be alone. We went that same afternoon. The sergeant was driving an unmarked patrol car. I was in the passenger seat, looking out the window, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. When we arrived at the boarding house, the owner was at the reception desk. She was surprised to see me with a police officer. Mary, what's going on? I need to pick up some things from my room, I said. She gave me the key without asking questions. We went up to the second floor. My room was at the end of the hall. The door was still locked, just as I had left it. I opened it with trembling hands. The room was exactly as I remembered it. The bed unmade. The window curtains drawn. The smell of stale air. I knelt down next to the bed and pulled out the shoebox I kept underneath. Inside were all my important documents. My birth certificate, my marriage certificate, my husband's death certificate, and the deed to the land. I carefully took it out and handed it to the sergeant. He quickly reviewed it. Perfect, he said. This is enough. It was then that I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Voices. I recognized one of them immediately. Michael. The sergeant heard it too. He put a hand on my shoulder. "Stay here," he whispered. He went out into the hallway. I stood paralyzed next to the bed, my heart beating so fast I thought it would burst out of my chest. I heard the sergeant's voice. "Can I help you?" "Who are you?" Michael replied. "What are you doing in my mother's room?" "I'm Sergeant Martinez." "And you are?" "Michael Olson. This is my mother's room. Where is she?" "I'm right here," I said, stepping out into the hallway. I don't know where I found the courage, but suddenly I was tired of hiding. Michael looked at me, surprised. Then his expression changed to something that pretended to be relief. "Mum, thank goodness. I've been looking for you everywhere." "Have you really?" I said. My voice sounded firmer than I felt. "Or were you just looking for this?" I held up the land deed. His face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice barely trembled. "We're talking about the forged signature you used to put my land up as collateral for your debts," the sergeant said. "We're talking about fraud, and we're also talking about the gas incident at this boarding house." Michael looked at me with a mixture of rage and fear. "Mum, what have you been telling this man? What lies have you invented?" "They're not lies," I said. "And you know it." For a moment I thought he was going to deny everything, that he was going to keep acting like the concerned son. But something in his face broke. I saw the truth there, the silent admission. "I had debts," he finally said, in a low voice. "I needed the money, and you weren't using that land for anything. Then you asked me to sell it to you. You didn't try to kill me for it." "I didn't try to kill you," he said, but without conviction. "The gas, Michael. Someone opened the water heater valve the night I didn't sleep here. Who was it?" He didn't answer. He just looked at me with eyes I no longer recognized. This wasn't my son. Or maybe he had always been this way, and I had been too blind to see it. "Michael Olson," the sergeant said, "you are under arrest for bank fraud and document forgery. You have the right to remain silent." While the sergeant read him his rights and put on the handcuffs, Michael never stopped looking at me. And in that look, I saw everything we had lost, everything we could never get back. I watched them take Michael away in the patrol car, his hands cuffed behind his back, his head bowed, shame or rage painted on his face. I couldn't tell which one it was. The boarding house owner was staring at me from the doorway with wide eyes, not knowing what to say. Sergeant Martinez stayed with me for a few more minutes. "I need you to come to the police station tomorrow to make a full statement. Bring all the documents you have. We're going to need every detail." I nodded, unable to speak. I was still processing what had just happened. My son had been arrested. Because of me, or because of him. I no longer even knew how to think about it. I didn't go back to the shelter that night. I couldn't face all those women with their own tragedies. I stayed in my room at the boarding house, sitting on the bed, staring at the wall. I didn't eat. I didn't cry. I just stayed there, feeling an enormous emptiness in my chest. When dawn broke, I got up like an automaton. I took a shower, got dressed, and went straight to look for the lady on the corner. I needed to tell her what had happened. I needed someone to tell me I had done the right thing. But when I got to her spot, I found something unexpected. She was there, but she wasn't alone. There was a young man with her, kneeling at her side, talking to her gently. He had a backpack and a camera hanging around his neck. I approached slowly. The lady saw me and smiled tiredly. "Mary," she said. "Come." I want you to meet someone. The young man stood up and held out his hand to me. Nice to meet you. My name is Josh. I'm a reporter. I shook his hand warily. A reporter? I'm doing a story on homelessness in the city, he explained. Gloria has been telling me her story. And yours too. I looked at the lady, now finally knowing her name. Gloria, you told him about me. She nodded. I told him everything. About your son. About the gas. About how you helped me every day without even knowing me. I don't understand, I said. Why? Josh took out a notebook. Because stories like yours need to be told. People think that people on the street are invisible, that they don't see anything, that they don't matter. But Gloria saw what was happening, and her testimony can be crucial for your case. The officer said her testimony doesn't carry weight because she doesn't have a fixed address, I said bitterly. That's why I'm here, Josh said. If I can document her story, if I can show that Gloria is a real person with a clear mind who witnessed a crime, her testimony gains more value. Plus, media exposure could pressure the authorities to take the case more seriously. I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to keep all this private, away from the public eye. But another part knew that Josh was right. Michael had resources, contacts. I only had the truth. What do you need from me? I asked. Your story, in your own words, and your permission to publish it. We spent the next hour sitting on a nearby bench. I told him everything from the beginning. How Michael had kicked me out of the house, how I had found work, how I had met Gloria, the warning, the gas, the arrest. Josh took notes quickly, stopping occasionally to ask me specific questions. Gloria sat beside me, nodding when I mentioned moments where she had been present. And the evidence of the fraud? Josh asked. You already presented it. I'm going to the police station today. The sergeant has the documents. Can I go with you? I'd like to document that process too. I hesitated, but finally nodded. If this was going to go public anyway, it might as well be with the whole truth. The three of us went to the police station together. Sergeant Martinez was surprised to see the reporter, but he didn't kick him out. Instead, he took me into an interview room and asked me to tell everything again, this time officially recording it. I spoke for almost 2 hours. The sergeant interrupted me sometimes to clarify details, to ask me to be more specific about some things. When I finished, I felt exhausted. We're going to process all of this, the sergeant said. Your son is being processed for bank fraud. That's for sure. The attempted murder is more complicated to prove, but with Gloria's testimony and the gas evidence, we have a foundation. How long will he be detained? I asked. It depends on whether he posts bail. For bank fraud, the bail could be around $30,000. If he can't pay it, he stays until trial. $30,000. Michael didn't have that kind of money. That's why he had tried to steal the land from me in the first place. We left the police station, and Josh walked me to the diner. It was time for my shift, and I couldn't miss it again. I'm going to write the article this week, he told me before leaving. I'll send you a copy before publishing it so you can approve everything. Sound good? Yes, I said. Thank you. Mr. George was waiting for me in the kitchen with a worried expression. There were more customers than usual, and he needed urgent help. I put on my apron and immersed myself in the work, grateful for the distraction. But in the middle of the afternoon, everything changed. A woman I immediately recognized walked in. It was Michael's wife. She looked disheveled, with smudged makeup and red eyes from crying. She saw me behind the counter and came straight toward me. You, she said with a trembling voice, how could you do this to your own son? Everyone in the diner fell silent. Mr. George came out of the kitchen when he heard the commotion. I didn't do anything to him, I said calmly, although I was shaking inside. He did it to himself. You put him in jail for a stupid piece of land that isn't even worth anything. He forged my signature. He tried to steal the only thing I had left from my husband, and when that didn't work, he tried to kill me. She shook her head violently. That's a lie. Michael would never do something like that. You're making everything up because you're resentful that he asked you to leave his house. His house, I repeated. That house that I helped pay for. That house where he's raising that son who now wants to see me dead. Ma'am, Mr. George intervened with a firm voice, I need you to leave. You're bothering my employee. Employee? She looked at me with contempt. Look what you've become. A cook in a dive diner. And all because of your pride. If you had signed the papers like Michael asked, none of this would have happened. You're right, I said. If I had let myself be robbed in silence, if I had agreed to die when the gas was opened in my room, none of this would have happened. But I'm alive, and I'm going to fight. She looked at me with pure hatred. This isn't over. Michael has lawyers. He'll get out. And when he gets out, you're going to regret it. Is that a threat? Mr. George asked, pulling out his phone. Because I can call the police right now. The woman threw one last furious look at me before leaving the diner. The silence hung heavy in the air. The customers slowly returned to their conversations. I stood behind the counter, feeling like my legs could barely support me. Mr. George put a hand on my shoulder. Take the rest of the day off. No, I said. I need to work. I need to stay busy. He nodded understandingly and went back to the kitchen. I kept working, but my hands shook every time I had to carry a plate. That night, when I returned to the boarding house, I found an envelope under my door. I picked it up, my heart racing. Inside was a handwritten note with crude letters. Drop the charges or you'll regret it. This is your last warning. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. I knew where it came from. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed sitting on the bed with the light on, staring at the door, waiting for someone to try to come in. I had put a chair under the doorknob, but I knew that wouldn't stop anyone if they really wanted to get in. At dawn, I went straight to the police station. I showed the note to Sergeant Martinez. He read it with a frown. This is witness intimidation. I'm going to add this to the file. Can't you do something more? I asked. Can't you protect me? I can put more frequent patrols near your boarding house. And I recommend that you don't go out alone at night. Do you have any safer place to stay? I thought about the shelter. I thought about asking Mr. George for help. But finally I shook my head. I didn't want to keep running. I'll be fine, I lied. But that afternoon, when Gloria saw me arrive at her corner, she immediately knew something was wrong. What happened? She asked. I showed her the note. She read it in silence and then looked at me with determination. You have to let Josh publish the article. Now. Don't wait. The more people know what's happening, the safer you'll be. You think so? I know how these things work. Criminals act in the shadows, but when there are lights pointing at them, they hide. If your story comes out in the newspaper, if people know who you are and what they're doing to you, they'll think twice before touching you. It made sense. I called Josh from Gloria's phone. He answered on the second ring. Publish the article, I told him without preamble, as soon as possible. Are you sure? I haven't even sent you the final version to review. I'm sure. Just make sure you tell the truth. I always do, he said. It's going to come out tomorrow in the morning edition, and in the digital version tonight too. I hung up and returned the phone to Gloria. She squeezed my hand. You did the right thing, she said. Now let the truth do its job. The article was published at 6 o'clock in the morning. Josh sent me the link by text message. I read it sitting on the edge of my bed, my hands shaking as I held the phone. The headline read, 69-year-old woman claims son tried to murder her over inheritance. A homeless woman saved her. There were photos, one of Gloria on her corner, another of the boarding house where I lived, and one of me, taken the day we went to the police station. I looked older than I remembered, more tired, but there was something in my eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. Determination. The article told everything. My eviction from the house, the job at the diner, how I had helped Gloria, the warning that saved my life, the gas, the document forgery, Michael's arrest. Josh had done a good job. He didn't exaggerate anything. He didn't paint me as a martyr or Michael as a monster. He just recounted the facts, letting the story speak for itself. At the end of the article, there was a quote from me that I didn't even remember saying. I don't want revenge. I just want justice. And I want other mothers to know that they are not alone if their own children betray them. I closed the phone and sat in silence. Now everyone would know my story. There was no turning back. When I arrived at the diner, Mr. George had already read the article. He looked at me with a mixture of compassion and respect. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't know things had gotten that far. No one did, I replied. Not even I wanted to admit it. Throughout the morning, the diner customers looked at me differently, some with pity, others with curiosity, a few with admiration. An older lady approached me at the end of her meal. I read your story, she said in a low voice. My son did something similar to me too. I never had the courage to report him. But you did. Thank you for that. She left before I could answer her, leaving me with a lump in my throat. In the middle of the afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. Mrs. Olson, this is attorney Teresa Vance. I read your story in the paper, and I'd like to offer you my services pro bono. I was speechless. Why would you do that? Because cases like yours need visibility. Because the family abuse of elderly parents by their children is more common than people think. And because no one should have to face this alone. I agreed to meet with her that same afternoon. Her office was in a modest downtown building. She was a woman in her 40s, with her hair pulled back in a bun and an intelligent gaze. We're going to go over everything from the beginning, she said, opening a new folder. I need every detail, every document, every piece of evidence you have. We spent 2 hours reviewing my case. She took notes meticulously, stopping occasionally to ask me specific questions. The bank fraud is solid, she finally said. We have the forged signature, we have your testimony, we have the original documents. That's a sure thing. The attempted murder is more complicated, but not impossible. Gloria's testimony is crucial, and the fact that the gas was opened specifically in your room the night you weren't there is very suspicious. What happens now? Now we wait for the legal process. Your son has the right to a lawyer and to defend himself. There will be a preliminary hearing in a few days to determine if there is enough evidence to go to trial. I will be there, representing you. I left her office feeling a little stronger. For the first time in a long time, I felt like someone was on my side, that I wasn't completely alone in this. When I walked past Gloria's corner, I found her surrounded by people. I approached, worried, but then I saw that it wasn't anything bad. They were people who had read the article and wanted to help her. Someone had brought her food, another a new blanket. A woman was offering her a place in a decent shelter. Gloria saw me and smiled. Look what your story has caused. Our story, I corrected her. That night, as I ate a piece of bread for dinner in my room, I received another call. This time it was Sergeant Martinez. "Mrs. Olson, I need to inform you that your son posted bail this morning." My heart sank. How? I thought he didn't have any money. Apparently, his wife borrowed money from some relatives. He was released under strict conditions. He can't approach you, he can't leave the city, and he has to report to the police station every week. But he's free. For now, yes, until the trial. I hung up, my hands trembling. Michael was free, out there, somewhere in the city, and although there was a restraining order, that was just a piece of paper. If he really wanted to hurt me, a piece of paper wouldn't stop him. I couldn't sleep that night. Every noise startled me. Every shadow that passed outside my window made me hold my breath. I put the chair under the doorknob again and left the light on. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I heard footsteps in the hallway. They stopped outside my door. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought whoever was outside could hear it. I waited. The seconds felt like hours. Then I heard the sound of something sliding under the door. I waited several minutes before daring to move. When I finally went to check, I found another envelope. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a photo. It was of me leaving the diner. Someone had been following me. Someone had been photographing me. And in the photo, a red marker had been used to draw an X over my face. There was no message. There was no need for one. The threat was clear. At dawn, I went back to the police station. Sergeant Martinez saw the photo, and his expression hardened. "This is a violation of the restraining order. I'm going to have him arrested again." What if it wasn't him? What if it was someone else? Who else would want to threaten you? I thought of Michael's wife, of her furious words in the diner, of her look of hatred. His wife came to the diner a few days ago. She threatened me. The sergeant wrote that down. We're going to investigate both of them. Meanwhile, I recommend that you find a safer place to stay. Do you have any family? Any friends? I shook my head. I had no one. Only Gloria, who lived on the street, and Mr. George, who had already done enough for me. "The shelter, then," I said with resignation. But when I arrived at the shelter that afternoon, they told me there were no beds available. It was full. I could try again the next day, but they couldn't guarantee anything. I stood on the street, my bag in my hand, not knowing what to do. The sun was beginning to set. Soon it would be night, and I had nowhere to sleep. It was then that I saw Mr. George approaching. He had come to look for me. "Gloria called me," he said. "She told me what happened, and I came to offer you something. I have a small room above the diner. I use it for storage, but we can clean it up. It's not much, but it has a bed and a lock on the door. You'd be safer there than at the boarding house." Tears burned my eyes. "I can't accept. You've already done so much for me." "I'm not asking for your permission," he said firmly. "I'm telling you the room is available. If you want to use it, use it. If not, it's your decision. But I'm not going to let one of my employees sleep on the street when I have a space available." I accepted. Not because I wanted to take advantage of his kindness, but because I had no other option. And because, deep down, I needed to feel safe, even if only for one night. The room above the diner was small, as he had said. It had a twin bed, an old dresser, and a window that overlooked an alley. But the door had a strong deadbolt, and the walls were thick. Here, at least, I would hear if someone tried to come in. Mr. George helped me bring up my few belongings. "The bathroom is downstairs, in the diner. You can use it whenever you want. And there's food in the kitchen. Don't go hungry." Thank you. That was all I could say. Words weren't enough to express what I felt. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, not because the bed was comfortable or the place was pretty, but because for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. The next morning, unexpected news arrived. Sergeant Martinez had arrested Michael's wife. They had found her near the boarding house the night before with a camera in her hand. She had been the one following me. She had taken the photo. "She says she only wanted to scare you," the sergeant explained over the phone. "That she wasn't going to really hurt you, but that doesn't matter. Witness intimidation is a serious crime. She's going to spend a few days detained while we process the charges." I hung up feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. Michael's wife wasn't a bad person. She was just desperate, trying to save her husband. But her actions had crossed a line. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week. Attorney Teresa prepared me for days, making me go over my testimony again and again, anticipating the questions Michael's lawyer might ask me. "They're going to try to paint you as a resentful mother," she warned me. "They're going to say you made everything up because you were angry that he asked you to leave his house. You have to stay calm. You have to stick to the facts." I practiced my testimony until the words felt mechanical, but I knew it was necessary. The trial wouldn't be won with emotions, it would be won with evidence. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived like a storm you see coming but still hits you hard. I woke up early before dawn and sat on the edge of the bed looking at the clothes I had prepared the night before. A simple grey dress, worn, but clean shoes. It was the best I had. Attorney Teresa picked me up at the diner at 7 o'clock in the morning. She carried a leather briefcase and a serious expression. "Ready?" she asked me. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. The courthouse was an old building with dark hallways and the smell of old papers. There were people waiting on benches outside the courtrooms, entire families, lawyers in expensive suits, talking in low voices. Everything felt intimidating and foreign to me. We entered the courtroom. It was smaller than I had imagined. There were wooden benches, a stand where the judge would sit, and 2 tables facing each other for the lawyers. At one of them, I saw Michael sitting next to his lawyer. He was wearing a suit I didn't recognize. He must have bought it especially for this, or maybe he had kept it stored all this time. He didn't look at me when I entered. He kept his gaze forward, as if I didn't exist. I sat down behind Attorney Teresa's table. Gloria was sitting on the public benches. She greeted me with a discreet nod. Josh, the reporter, was also there with his notebook. And Mr. George, who had closed the diner for the morning to accompany me. The judge entered, and we all stood up. He was an older man, about 60 years old, with completely white hair and thick glasses. He sat down and began to review the documents in front of him. "All right," he finally said. "We are here for the preliminary hearing in the case of Mary Olson versus Michael Olson. The charges are bank fraud, document forgery, and attempted murder. Is the prosecution ready to present their arguments?" Attorney Teresa stood up. "Yes, Your Honor." For the next hour, she presented all the evidence, the forged signature on the bank documents, Michael's bank statements showing his debts, the technician's report about the gas leak in my room, the testimony of the boarding house owner. Everything was there, organized and clear. Then it was my turn to testify. I went up to the stand, my legs trembling. I swore to tell the truth with my hand on a worn Bible, and I began to tell my story. I talked about how Michael had asked me to leave his house, about how I had found work at the diner, about my conversations with Gloria, about the night she warned me not to return to the boarding house, about the gas. Michael's lawyer interrupted me several times with objections. "That is speculation, Your Honor. The witness is assuming intentions that she cannot prove." Attorney Teresa responded to each objection with professional calmness. When my testimony finished, it was the turn of Michael's lawyer to cross-examine me. He was a young man, about 30 years old, with an impeccable suit and a practiced smile. "Mrs. Olson," he began in a soft tone, "it is true that you and your son had disagreements about the management of your finances." "No," I replied. "He never consulted me about my finances." "But you were aware that he had financial problems?" "I found out later when he forged my signature." "Isn't it possible that you misinterpreted the situation? That your son needed help and you, in your vulnerable situation, felt attacked?" "I didn't misinterpret anything," I said firmly. "My son forged my signature to use my property as collateral for his debts, and when that wasn't enough, he tried to kill me with a gas leak." "That is a very serious accusation. Do you have any direct evidence that your son opened the gas valve?" "Gloria's testimony. She saw him circling my boarding house that night." The lawyer smiled. "Ah, yes, Gloria. A woman with no fixed address, with no verifiable identification, with no background we can check. Do you really expect this court to accept the testimony of someone whose identity we can't even confirm?" "Gloria saved my life," I said, "and her testimony is just as valid as anyone else's." "Your Honor," Attorney Teresa intervened, "the credibility of a witness is not determined by their housing situation." The judge nodded. "Proceed, counsel." The cross-examination continued for another half-hour. Michael's lawyer tried to discredit every part of my story. He insinuated that I was making things up out of spite, that I was confused because of my age, that I had misinterpreted my son's intentions. But I remained calm. I answered every question with the truth. I didn't let myself be intimidated. When my testimony finally ended, I returned to my seat, trembling. Attorney Teresa squeezed my hand. "You did well," she whispered. Then it was Gloria's turn. She walked up to the stand in her donated clothes, clean but worn. She swore to tell the truth and began to testify. She talked about how she had met me, about the times I gave her food and money, about the night she saw Michael circling my boarding house with a bag in his hand. Her voice was clear and her memory precise. Michael's lawyer tried to discredit her too. "How can you be sure it was my client? Do you have a photo?" "I don't need a photo," Gloria replied with dignity. "I have eyes, and I saw that man sitting there lurking where he shouldn't have been." When the testimonies finished, the judge took a recess. We went out into the hallway to wait. Attorney Teresa seemed optimistic. "The fraud is solid," she told me. "That's definitely going to trial. The attempted murder is harder to prove, but we presented a strong case." Half an hour later, we went back in. The judge had his decision ready. After reviewing the evidence presented, he said, "I find that there is probable cause to proceed with the charges of bank fraud and document forgery. Regarding the attempted murder charge, although the evidence is circumstantial, there are enough suspicious elements to warrant a deeper investigation. The case will proceed to full trial." I felt like I could breathe again. Michael would still face the charges. Justice would take its course. The months that followed were the strangest of my life. As we waited for the date of the full trial, my routine became a strange mix of normalcy and constant tension. I worked at the diner during the day. I slept in the room above the kitchen at night. And every week I met with Attorney Teresa to prepare my final testimony. But something had changed in me. I was no longer just the woman who had been kicked out of her house. I was no longer just the victim. I was becoming someone different, someone stronger. Josh's article had an impact that none of us expected. Other women started contacting me. Women who had gone through similar situations. Daughters who had abandoned their mothers. Sons who had stolen their social security checks. Families that had disintegrated because of greed. One afternoon, While I was cleaning the tables at the diner, an older woman walked in. She must have been around 70 years old, with hair dyed a mahogany shade and hands full of rings. She sat at a corner table and waited for me to approach. "Mary Olson?" she asked when I arrived with the menu. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "I read your story. My name is Alma Davis, and I came to offer you something." She introduced herself as the director of an organization that helped seniors in situations of family abuse. "We want you to give talks," she explained, "to tell your story, to help other women recognize the signs of abuse before it's too late." The idea overwhelmed me. I'm not good at public speaking. "You don't need to be good," Alma said softly. "You just need to be honest. Your story has power. You can save lives." I agreed to think about it, and the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. If my suffering could be used to help others, then it hadn't been in vain. My first talk was at a small community centre. There were about 20 women sitting on folding chairs, all over 60 years old, all with stories written on their tired faces. My hands were trembling when I stood in front of them. "My name is Mary Olson," I began, "and my son tried to kill me for a piece of land worth $20,000. The silence in the room was absolute, and then I started telling. I told them everything. I omitted nothing. The pain, the shame, the fear. But I also told them about the hope, about Gloria, about the people who had helped me when I needed it most." When I finished, several women had tears in their eyes. One of them raised her hand. "My daughter does the same thing," she said with a broken voice. "She constantly asks me for money. She threatens me if I don't give it to her. I thought it was my fault, that I had done something wrong." "It's not your fault," I told her, "and you're not alone." After that talk, more followed. I spoke at churches, at senior day centres, at support groups. Each time it was easier. Each time I felt like my story was serving something bigger than myself. Meanwhile, Gloria was also changing. The exposure from the article had brought her unexpected help. A non-profit organization had gotten her a spot in a permanent shelter. She no longer slept on the street. She had a bed, a roof, 3 meals a day. But the most important thing was that we had formed a bond. We saw each other almost every day. Sometimes she came to the diner and Mr. George gave her free food. Other times I would go to the shelter to visit her. We talked about everything and nothing. She told me stories from her life before she became homeless. I told her my fears about the approaching trial. "Do you know what the strangest thing about all this is?" I said to her one afternoon while we were drinking coffee at the shelter. "That my son kicked me out of his life, but I found a new family. You, Mr. George, Attorney Teresa, even Josh. You all have become the family I never thought I would have." Gloria smiled. "Sometimes God closes doors so we can find windows, or in our case, so we can find street corners." We laughed together. It was the first time in months that I could truly laugh. The trial was scheduled for early December. 2 weeks before, Attorney Teresa called me with news. "Michael's lawyer wants to make a deal," she told me. "He's offering to plead guilty to the bank fraud in exchange for you dropping the attempted murder charge." "What does that mean?" "It means he would go to prison for the fraud, probably between 3 and 5 years. But he wouldn't face charges for trying to kill you. It's a shorter sentence." "And what do you think?" There was a pause. "I think the attempted murder charge is hard to prove. We have strong circumstantial evidence, but we don't have a confession or a direct witness who saw him open the gas valve. A jury might doubt it. Accepting the deal guarantees he goes to prison. Rejecting it is a risk." "How long do I have to decide?" "Until tomorrow." I spent that night awake. I paced back and forth in my small room, thinking about all the options. Part of me wanted to reject the deal. I wanted Michael to face all the charges. I wanted him to pay for trying to kill me. But another part of me was tired, tired of fighting, tired of reliving the pain over and over. 3 years in prison was enough for him to understand the consequences of his actions. 5 years, even more. Even the next morning, I called attorney Teresa. I accept the deal, I told her, but with one condition. I want him to give up any rights to the land. I want him to sign legal documents, ceding any future claim to my property. And I want a permanent restraining order. I don't want him to ever come near me again, even when he gets out of prison. I can arrange that, she said. Leave it to me. The deal was finalized 3 days later. Michael pleaded guilty to bank fraud and document forgery. He signed the papers giving up any rights to my property. The judge imposed a sentence of 4 years in prison, with no possibility of parole until he had served at least 2 years. I didn't go to the sentencing hearing. I didn't want to see his face when he heard the verdict. Attorney Teresa went on my behalf and called me afterward with the news. It's over, she told me. You can move on with your life now. But moving on wasn't as simple as it sounded. The months that followed were about adjustment, about healing, about learning to live without the constant weight of fear. Mr. George offered me a permanent job at the diner with a decent salary. You're not just a temporary employee anymore, he told me. You're part of this place, and I want you to stay. I accepted with gratitude. The diner had become my refuge, my home. I also started rebuilding my financial life. With attorney Teresa's help, I managed to sell the land my husband had left me. It wasn't worth much, as Michael had said, only $23,000, but it was enough to start over. I used part of the money to rent a small apartment, just one room, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom. But it was mine. No one could kick me out of there. No one could tell me there was no room for me. With another part of the money, I helped Gloria. I bought her new clothes, shoes, a thick coat for the winter. I paid for a dental treatment she urgently needed. It wasn't charity. It was gratitude. She had saved my life. The least I could do was help her improve hers. You didn't have to do this, she told me when I handed her the bags with her new things. Yes, I did, I replied. You gave me a second chance. Let me return the favor. The talks I gave at community centers began to multiply. Alma Davis, the director of the organization, had officially incorporated me as a volunteer. Now I traveled around the city giving lectures on family abuse towards seniors. Every time I told my story, I saw faces that recognized themselves in it. Women who nodded with tears in their eyes. Men who admitted to having gone through similar situations. And always, at the end, someone would approach to thank me. Your story gave me the courage to report my son, a woman told me after one talk. Thanks to you, my mother finally accepted that what was happening to her wasn't normal, another one told me. Every thank you was a reminder that my suffering had not been useless, that something good had come out of all that pain. A year after Michael's arrest, Josh published a follow-up article. 1 year later, how Mary Olson rebuilt her life after family betrayal. The article talked about my work at the diner, my talks, my friendship with Gloria, about how I had turned my tragedy into a mission. The response was overwhelming. I received letters from all over the country. Some were from women thanking me for giving them a voice. Others were from remorseful sons who had read my story and realized the harm they were causing their own parents. One particular letter made me cry. It was from a young woman who had been considering kicking her mother out of her house due to space issues. After reading my story, she had decided to look for another solution. I don't want to be like Mary's son, she wrote. I don't want my mother to end up like her. Thank you for opening my eyes. I kept that letter in a drawer, along with others I had received. On difficult days, when the memory of the pain was too strong, I would take them out and reread them. They reminded me why I had decided to make my story public, why I had decided to keep fighting. 2 years have passed since Michael went to prison. 2 years in which my life has changed in ways I never imagined possible. I wake up every morning in my small apartment, make coffee in my tiny kitchen, and look out the window at the city that almost destroyed me, but ultimately gave me a second chance. Mr. George's diner is still my daily refuge. I'm now the kitchen manager. He says my food has a special flavor, that people come specifically for my cooking. I don't know if it's true or just his way of making me feel valuable, but I like to believe him. Mr. George has become more than a boss. He's the brother I never had, the friend who appeared when I needed him most. Sometimes, on quiet afternoons, we sit in the kitchen drinking coffee, and he tells me stories of his youth. I tell him mine, and we laugh at how life has strange ways of putting the right people in your path just when you're about to give up. Gloria still lives in the shelter, but she no longer spends her days sitting on a corner. Now she volunteers at a community soup kitchen. She helps serve food to other homeless people. She says it's her way of giving back what others gave her when she needed it most. We see each other at least 3 times a week. Sometimes I go to visit her at the shelter. Other times she comes to the diner and we have dinner together after I close. We talk about everything. About our past lives, about our fears, about our dreams for the future. She is the sister I chose, the family I built with my own hands. Did you know that today marks exactly 2 years since I gave you that warning? She said to me a few days ago, while we were sharing a plate of chicken and rice in the empty diner. I didn't, I said. But thinking about it, I realized how much I had changed since that night. The woman who agreed not to return to her boarding house because of the advice of a stranger no longer exists. In her place is someone stronger, someone who knows that kindness is not weakness and that asking for help is not a shame. My talks at community centers have expanded. Now I travel to other cities. Alma Davis's organization pays me a small stipend for each conference. It's not much, but added to my diner salary, it's enough to live with dignity. Every time I step onto a podium and see those tired faces looking at me with hope, I remember why I do this. It's not just for me. It's for all the women who are going through what I went through. For all the mothers who feel invisible, disposable, worthless. You are not a burden, I always tell them. You are human beings with dignity, with rights, with stories that deserve to be told. And if someone, even if it's your own family, makes you feel less than that, then that someone is wrong, not you. After each talk, lines of women form, wanting to speak with me. Some just want to give me a hug. Others need advice on how to report their abusive relatives. Some simply need someone to listen to them. I stay with each one for as long as they need, because I know what it feels like to be alone. I know what it feels like for no one to listen to you. And if I can give them even 10 minutes of attention, of validation, of companionship, I do it. I have received 2 letters from Michael since he has been in prison. The first arrived a year ago. It was short, cold, full of justifications. It wasn't my intention to hurt you, it said. I was just desperate. I hope you can forgive me someday. I didn't answer it. The second letter arrived 3 months ago. It was different, more honest, more broken. It talked about how he had had time to think in prison, about how he finally understood the magnitude of what he had done, about how he lived with the guilt every day. I don't expect your forgiveness, he wrote at the end. I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I truly am sorry. And that if I could go back in time and do things differently, I would. I kept that letter in the same drawer where I keep the others. The ones from the women who thanked me for my story. The ones from the remorseful sons. All together, reminding me that life is complex, that people can be good and bad at the same time, that forgiveness is not always possible, but understanding is. I don't know if I will ever be able to forgive Michael. Honestly, I don't know if I want to. What he did almost cost me my life. It cost me my home, my security, my faith in family. Those are wounds that don't heal easily. But I've learned that I don't need to forgive him to move forward, that I can carry the pain and still build a beautiful life, that I can remember what happened without letting it define me. Attorney Teresa has become a close friend. We have lunch together once a month. She tells me about her other cases. I tell her about my conferences. Sometimes she asks me for advice on how to approach older clients who have gone through similar situations to mine. You have a gift for this, she told me the last time we met. For connecting with people, for making them feel seen. Maybe she's right. Or maybe it's just that I've been in their place. I've felt what they feel, and that genuine empathy is something that can't be faked. The apartment I rented has become my sanctuary. It's small, yes. The walls are thin, and sometimes I hear the neighbors arguing. But it's mine. No one can kick me out. No one can tell me there is no room for me here. I've decorated the walls with photos, one of Gloria and me the day I helped her move into the shelter, another of Mr. George and me in front of the diner, another one of my first conference. With all those women applauding after I finished speaking. I don't have pictures of Michael. I don't have pictures of my old life. That life ended. And although it hurts to admit it, it was the best thing that could have happened. Because it forced me to rebuild myself. It forced me to discover who I was beyond being a mother, beyond being a wife, beyond all the roles that others had assigned to me. I discovered that I am strong, that I am capable, that I can survive even when everything crumbles around me. A few weeks ago, Alma Davis offered me a formal job at the organization. We need someone like you, she told me. Someone who has lived this. Someone who can lead our support program for victims of family abuse. I told her I would think about it. It's an incredible opportunity. But it also means leaving the diner, leaving the place that gave me refuge when I needed it most. I spoke with Mr. George about it. I expected him to be upset, to tell me I was abandoning him. But instead, he smiled. Mary, he said, I gave you a job because you needed it. But I always knew you were destined for something bigger. If this opportunity makes you happy, take it. You will always have a place here if you decide to come back. His words made me cry, because they confirmed something I had begun to understand. That good people exist. That kindness is not a weakness. That helping others without expecting anything in return is what makes us human. I accepted the job. I start next month. I will lead a team of social workers and volunteers who help seniors in situations of abuse. I will design programs. I will conduct training. I will continue giving conferences. But now, as an official part of my job, it's terrifying and exciting at the same time. Yesterday, as I walked back to my apartment after work, I passed the corner where Gloria used to sit. No one is there anymore. But I stopped anyway. I stood in that spot, remembering. I remembered the first time I gave her some coins. I remembered all the times we looked at each other in silence. Two women invisible to the world, but visible to each other. I remembered the night she grabbed my hand and told me not to go back to my boarding house. That warning saved my life. But more than that, It changed the course of my existence. It led me down a path I never would have chosen, but one I wouldn't trade for anything now. Because yes, I lost my son. I lost my home. I lost the life I knew. But I gained something much more valuable. I gained my dignity. I gained my voice. I gained the certainty that I am stronger than I ever imagined. And I gained a new family. Not of blood, but of choice. Gloria, Mr. George, Teresa, Alma, Josh. All the women I've met at my conferences. Everyone who helped me when I was at my lowest point. This morning, as I was having coffee in my apartment, I received a message from Gloria. "Want to get breakfast together today? I have something to tell you." I replied yes immediately, because that's what family does. It shows up, it's present, it's there through the good times and the bad. I put on my coat, the one I bought with the money from the land sale, and walked toward the diner where we had agreed to meet. The sun was shining. It was cold, but not unpleasantly so. The city was waking up around me, full of life, full of possibilities. And as I walked, I thought about everything that had happened, about how far I had come, about the woman I had been, and the woman I had become. I am no longer the 69-year-old lady who was kicked out of her house. I am no longer just the victim of her son's betrayal. I am Mary Olson. I am a survivor. I am a fighter. I am living proof that it is never too late to start over. And if my story can help even one person find the courage to get out of an abusive situation, then every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of fear will have been worth it. Because in the end, life is not about what happens to us. It's about what we do with what happens to us. And I chose not to remain in the role of the victim. I chose to stand up. I chose to fight. I chose to turn my pain into purpose. And that, more than anything else, is my victory. I arrived at the diner and saw Gloria waiting for me at a table by the window. When she saw me walk in, she smiled. That smile I had first seen 2 years ago on a street corner. That smile that had saved my life. I sat down across from her and took her wrinkled hand in mine. "Thank you," I told her. "Not for the first time. Probably not for the last time." "For what?" she asked, though we both knew the answer. "For seeing me when no one else did. For helping me when you had no reason to. For reminding me that there is still goodness in this world." She squeezed my hand. "You did the same for me. We saved each other." And she was right. Because that's what people who find each other in the darkness do. They hold on. They support each other. And together, they find the path toward the light.